the salt spray from the Pacific Ocean mixed with diesel fumes as Elena Vasquez knelt beside the damaged Humvee, her calloused fingers working through the engine's mechanical entrails. Camp Pendleton's motor pool hummed with the controlled chaos of morning maintenance routines, but Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen's voice cut through the ambient noise like a serrated blade. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 47 minutes on a simple alternator replacement, Chen announced to his gathering audience, his tone dripping with theatrical disdain as he consulted his stopwatch. This is exactly why we don't let weekend warriors handle real marine equipment. Some people learn mechanics from comic books and think they can fix military hardware. The snickers rippled through the assembled Marines like wildfire through dry brush. Phone cameras emerged from cargo pockets, ready to document another installment of Chen's daily entertainment program. Elena's weathered hands never paused in their methodical work, each movement precise despite the tremor of controlled fury building beneath her composed exterior. She adjusted the worn canvas tool roll at her side once, twice, 3 times, an unconscious ritual that had kept her centered through far worse storms than this one. The bolt housing finally yielded to her expertise, revealing stress fractures in the mounting bracket that 4 different marine mechanics had somehow overlooked during their inspection. Chen stepped closer, his shadow falling across her workspace like storm clouds blocking sunlight. His polished combat boot deliberately kicked her wrench set, sending tools skittering across the concrete floor like metallic hail. "You paying attention to me, Vasquez?" His voice carried the arrogance of someone who had never been truly tested. Or is basic English another skill you're faking your way through? Elena's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but her hands remained steady as she extracted the compromised component. One wrong move here, and whoever drove this vehicle into combat would be stranded in hostile territory, vulnerable to enemy fire. Through her peripheral vision, she noticed Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez, observing from the maintenance bay doorway, his expression carrying depths that transcended mere supervisory concern. Something flickered behind his eyes, a recognition that seemed to struggle against the fog of years and classified memories. What Chen didn't know, what none of them suspected, was that in 72 hours, encrypted communications would crackle through secure military channels, carrying a name that had been buried in black site files for 6 years. A name that would drain the color from Chen's face when he realized the woman he had chosen for daily humiliation had once been marked for elimination by the most dangerous enemies America had ever faced. Elena's alarm pierced the pre-dawn darkness at 0430 every morning, pulling her from dreams she never quite remembered, but always left her scanning for exit routes. Her apartment reflected the transient lifestyle of someone perpetually ready to disappear, furnished with items that could be abandoned without sentiment. She moved through her morning routine with military precision disguised as civilian normalcy, her coffee strong enough to jumpstart a generator, while she reviewed maintenance schedules on a tablet held together with electrical tape and determination. The drive to base took her through empty California highways where any pursuing vehicle would stand out like a beacon, though she told herself such precautions were merely paranoid habits from another life. 6 years of civilian existence should have dulled those combat instincts. Should have. Being first to arrive meant first to notice discrepancies others would miss. Elena walked the motor pool like a detective, examining a crime scene, cataloging changes, identifying potential failures before they could manifest into battlefield disasters. Her mechanical expertise transcended standard competence, approaching an almost supernatural ability to diagnose vehicle systems through subtle vibrations, unusual sounds, the way metal fatigue altered the harmonic resonance of stressed components. Yet she buried this extraordinary skill beneath a facade of quiet competence, allowing others to claim credit for her innovations, content to remain invisible in plain sight. It was safer that way. It had always been safer that way. Chen's campaign against her had begun with minor provocations, a snide comment here, a missed training opportunity there. But grief was a toxin that demanded release, and Elena had become his chosen vessel for that poison. His younger sister Maria haunted every interaction, though Chen never spoke her name aloud. The ghost lived in his rigid adherence to regulations, in his visceral reaction to any deviation from established procedures, in the way his fists clenched when he watched Elena solve problems through intuition rather than manual guidance. He had constructed a fortress of rules around his pain, and her competence represented a siege engine threatening those carefully built walls. The escalation followed a predictable trajectory that Elena recognized from other theaters, other conflicts, when someone needed a scapegoat to make sense of senseless loss. Chen began documenting her every action, photographing her repairs, constructing what he believed was evidence of incompetence and corner-cutting. He assigned her the most challenging repairs, the dirtiest assignments, orchestrated opportunities for public embarrassment with the precision of a military operation. But his masterstroke was more insidious than mere workplace harassment. He began circulating rumors about her background, suggesting she had falsified her credentials, that her qualifications were fabricated, that someone should investigate Elena Vasquez's suspiciously incomplete history more thoroughly. The whispers spread through the base like smoke through ventilation systems, infiltrating every conversation, every performance evaluation, every assessment of her capabilities. What Chen failed to realize was that some histories were designed to remain buried. Some names carried prices on them that transcended monetary value. And somewhere in the shadows beyond the California desert, old enemies maintained digital ears, tuned to exactly the kind of careless chatter that could lead them to a ghost they had been hunting for 6 long years. Elena's tool roll felt heavier with each passing day as she completed her shifts, the weight of it a constant reminder of hands that had once held instruments capable of eliminating targets from distances measured in miles rather than feet. Tomorrow would bring fresh challenges, new opportunities for Chen's cruelty to manifest. But tonight, in the stark silence of her minimalist apartment, she would clean her tools with the same methodical care she had once applied to maintaining precision weapon systems that could alter the course of entire conflicts. Because somewhere in the depths of her subconscious a warning signal was beginning to chime. The kind of internal alarm that had preserved her life when others had fallen to enemy fire. The kind that whispered Chen's harassment was about to become the least dangerous threat she faced. Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez had begun noticing the inconsistencies 4 weeks into Elena's contract assignment. Her maintenance techniques incorporated methodologies taught exclusively in specialized military programs, classified approaches that no civilian contractor should possess. When he casually inquired about her training background, she deflected with practiced smoothness, crediting online certification courses and her grandfather's garage wisdom. But Rodriguez's memory was extensive, and something about her hands, the way they moved with surgical precision, the specific pattern of scars across her knuckles, triggered recollections of a night in Kandahar, when those same hands had saved his convoy from catastrophic ambush. The memory surfaced in fragments. Smoke, screaming, the metallic taste of blood and sand, and a woman's voice cutting through chaos with calm, absolute authority. The quiet investigation Rodriguez initiated revealed carefully constructed gaps in Elena's documented history. She existed on paper extending back 6 years, but before that timeline, she was essentially a phantom. Employment records showed standard civilian positions, but the chronology aligned suspiciously with known special operations deployment schedules. Her technical certifications were legitimate, but acquired through accelerated programs typically reserved for military veterans with active security clearances. Each thread he pulled revealed not deception, but protection. Someone had constructed Elena Vasquez's identity with the meticulous attention to detail characteristic of witness protection programs. But protection from what? And why would a civilian automotive contractor require that level of operational security? The more Rodriguez investigated, the more convinced he became that Elena represented far more than she appeared. Chen's paranoia fed voraciously on Rodriguez's protective behavior toward Elena. He interpreted every intervention as evidence of corruption, every defense of her work as proof of some deeper conspiracy. In his grief-twisted logic, Rodriguez had been compromised by whatever Elena represented. Competence without proper credentials, expertise without appropriate pedigree, success without following established hierarchies. Chen began copying base security on his harassment reports, escalating his accusations, demanding comprehensive investigations into both Elena and Rodriguez. His documentation grew increasingly personal, including her residential address, her daily movement patterns, photographs captured without consent or authorization. The harassment transformed into a crusade, and crusades invariably demanded sacrificial victims. "She's concealing something significant," Chen confided to Corporal Williams during their morning briefing session, his voice tight with certainty. "Nobody develops that level of mechanical expertise from internet tutorials and weekend garage projects." Rodriguez knows it too, which explains why he's protecting her from proper scrutiny. Williams, a 15-year veteran who had witnessed enough military politics to recognize dangerous obsession when he encountered it, attempted to redirect the conversation toward more productive channels. "Maybe she's simply exceptionally skilled at her assigned duties, Chen. Some contractors bring civilian expertise that complements our capabilities." Chen's laughter carried bitter edges. "She represents a security vulnerability, a potential liability waiting to manifest. Mark my words, when something catastrophic occurs, when someone gets injured because of her unauthorized modifications to established procedures, Rodriguez will have blood on his hands for enabling her." The critical error occurred when Chen decided to circumvent local command channels entirely. Frustrated by Rodriguez's continued interference and the base commander's apparent indifference to his concerns, he compiled his extensive surveillance documentation into a comprehensive report and transmitted it through multiple military communication networks simultaneously. He wanted to ensure someone, somewhere in the chain of command, would take decisive action against what he perceived as a clear and present danger to operational security and Marine Corps standards. What Chen couldn't have known was that certain communication channels had been compromised by foreign intelligence services, that specific keywords in his detailed report would trigger automated alerts in locations where Elena Vasquez's photograph carried a very different identification beneath it. An identification that read, "Gunnery Sergeant Sarah Mitchell, USMC Scout Sniper, wanted for elimination by any means necessary." Elena sensed the atmospheric change like barometric pressure before a hurricane makes landfall. Years of survival in hostile environments had taught her to recognize when she had been identified as a target, when invisible crosshairs were slowly aligning on her position through the scope of patient enemies. She began her extraction preparations with the same systematic approach she applied to vehicle maintenance, updating documentation, researching potential relocation opportunities, calculating exactly how rapidly she could vanish if circumstances demanded it. But each passing day brought new challenges as she observed preventable maintenance failures accumulating around the motor pool, watched junior Marines following procedures that would eventually result in catastrophic breakdowns in combat situations. The oath she had sworn years ago still resonated in her bones, creating internal conflict with the pragmatic survival instincts that had preserved her life through multiple deployments. How many Marines would die if she abandoned her post? How many families would receive folded flags because she chose personal safety over professional duty? The decisive moment arrived, disguised as routine administrative business. A young Marine approached her workstation carrying a tablet displaying social media posts from the previous evening. Chen's latest public humiliation had achieved viral status within military social networks, shared and reshared with cruel commentary that painted Elena as incompetent and potentially dangerous. But Elena's trained eye caught something others had missed in the video's background imagery. A reflection in the maintenance bay window showed someone photographing her from a different angle, someone whose stance and positioning indicated professional surveillance training rather than casual documentation. The net was contracting around her position, and Chen's vendetta had provided the breadcrumbs her enemies required to locate their primary target. Rodriguez confronted her that evening as she worked alone in the motor pool, the overhead lighting casting long shadows that seemed to conceal secrets within their depths. "Gunnery Sergeant Mitchell," he said quietly, the name suspended between them like a bridge spanning 6 years of carefully maintained deception. Elena's hands stilled on the transmission component she had been adjusting, but she maintained her position beneath the vehicle. "I haven't heard that name spoken aloud in quite some time, Gunny," she replied, the admission carrying both relief and resignation. "Though I believe you held the rank of Staff Sergeant when we last served together." The shared memory of Operation Desert Falcon existed in the silence that followed, a night when death had been measured in heartbeats and salvation delivered through steady hands and perfect marksmanship. A night when Sarah Patch Mitchell had earned her nickname by patching together impossible shots that turned certain defeat into miraculous victory. "They're closing in on your position," Rodriguez said, his voice weighted with the gravity of old debts and current dangers. Chen's reports traveled through compromised communication channels. Foreign intelligence services have been monitoring military networks for any trace of your real identity. Any hint of the sniper who cost them millions in failed operations and eliminated personnel. Elena finally emerged from beneath the vehicle, her face showing the exhaustion of someone who had been running from shadows for too long. How much time do I have remaining? Intelligence assessments suggest 72 hours maximum, possibly less depending on their operational capabilities. They've demonstrated patience, but patient predators represent the most lethal variety of threat. Her tool roll suddenly felt heavier, weighted with memories of different tools from different times, when her hands had been all that stood between American forces and catastrophic defeat. She had believed those days were behind her, that she could exist quietly in the margins, maintaining vehicles instead of eliminating targets. But shadows had a tendency to reveal themselves when artificial light struck them at precisely the right angle. And Chen's spotlight had been burning with increasing intensity for months, illuminating corners she had worked desperately to keep dark. The emergency alert shattered the morning routine 2 days later like incoming artillery fire. Enemy forces detected. Communications intercepted. Base vulnerabilities exposed with surgical precision that suggested inside knowledge of defensive capabilities. But it was the coded transmission that followed, crackling through secured frequencies with the clarity of a death sentence, that sent ice through Elena's circulatory system. "The phantom sniper of Desert Falcon still draws breath," the voice said in accented English, each syllable carefully enunciated for maximum psychological impact. "Paradise awaits those who complete Allah's unfinished business." Elena's carefully constructed world disintegrated in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Her tool roll suddenly felt oppressive with the weight of names she whispered during sleepless nights. Jackson, Torres, Washington. The Marines who had died because her marksmanship had made her a priority target, because her expertise had cost the enemy too many strategic objectives, too many operational assets, too many irreplaceable personnel. The flashback struck with the violence of an improvised explosive device, driving her to her knees on the cold concrete floor of the motor pool. Afghanistan materialized around her in overwhelming sensory detail. The taste of dust and cordite, the weight of responsibility measured in lives hanging in the balance, the impossible complexity of wind calculations and range estimations that had to be perfect, while indirect fire fell like deadly precipitation around her position. Jackson's voice echoed across the years with heartbreaking clarity. "Steady hands, Gunny. Make it count." The secondary explosive device concealed, where no tactical manual suggested searching, discovered only because she had learned to anticipate enemy psychology rather than simply follow established procedures. The blast that claimed Jackson, the shrapnel that wounded Rodriguez, her hands working frantically to maintain his life while the world exploded in chaos around their position. The choice between saving one life or many, made in milliseconds and regretted through 6 years of civilian exile. Back in the present moment, tears streamed down Elena's face as she gripped the tool roll that had once contained instruments of precision death rather than mechanical repair. Around her, the mockery had ceased entirely, replaced by uncomfortable awareness that they were witnessing something profound and devastating. Chen stood motionless, his righteous anger dissolving as he recognized grief that mirrored his own loss, pain that transcended the boundaries of rank and regulation. Rodriguez knelt beside her, his presence serving as an anchor to current reality, his whispered words pulling her back from the psychological abyss that threatened to consume her entirely. "You saved hundreds of lives, Patch. Let us save yours now." The intelligence briefing that followed stripped away 6 years of carefully maintained fiction, like industrial solvent removing paint from metal. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Gunnery Sergeant Sarah Mitchell had been the Marine Corps' most successful scout sniper, her innovative techniques and impossible accuracy saving countless American lives across multiple combat deployments. Operation Desert Falcon had been her masterpiece in her destruction, a massive enemy offensive prevented through her marksmanship, over 300 Marines saved from certain death, but her unit betrayed by compromised intelligence networks. The enemy had specifically targeted her team, eliminating 2 of her spotters in a coordinated assault designed to neutralize the phantom sniper, whose expertise had cost them strategic victories across the theater of operations. But Sarah had survived, hidden within witness protection programs, with a manufactured identity, a fabricated history, a completely new existence. Elena Vasquez was supposed to be invisible, untraceable, permanently safe from the enemies who had never stopped hunting the ghost sniper, whose rifle had altered the course of entire campaigns. But here came the revelation that would haunt Chen for the remainder of his military career and beyond. The intelligence leak that had compromised Sarah's unit in Afghanistan had originated from a maintenance report filed by Lance Corporal Maria Chen, Marcus's younger sister, who had served with a forward logistics element supporting Sarah's operations. Maria had been assigned to a motor transport unit that serviced the vehicles used by Sarah's reconnaissance team. In her meticulous documentation of mechanical issues and maintenance schedules, she had inadvertently included classified information about movement patterns, operational timelines, and tactical procedures. The enemy had intercepted these communications, using Maria's innocent but detailed reports to track Sarah's team and predict their operational patterns. When the coordinated assault materialized, Maria's convoy had been among the first responders to the emergency evacuation request. The mechanical failure that killed her hadn't been random equipment malfunction. It had been sabotage, revenge executed against her unwitting role in exposing the enemy's strategic weaknesses to Sarah's devastating marksmanship. Chen's psychological foundation crumbled as the connections became unavoidably clear. His sister hadn't died from negligence or mechanical failure. She had been murdered because her attention to detail and professional competence had helped Sarah save American lives. The very qualities Chen admired most in Maria, her careful documentation and rigid adherence to proper procedures, had been weaponized against them both by enemies who understood how to exploit good intentions for evil purposes. And now, in his grief-driven campaign to honor his sister's memory, Chen had repeated the same tragic pattern. His detailed surveillance of Elena, transmitted through identical compromised communication channels, had once again exposed her location to the enemies who had never ceased hunting the phantom sniper of Desert Falcon. The base commander's voice cut through Chen's spiral of horrific realization like a blade through flesh. Enemy operatives have been tracked entering the continental United States using intelligence derived from your surveillance reports. Staff Sergeant. Satellite reconnaissance shows vehicles converging on Southern California, their occupants carrying photographs of Elena Vasquez that you personally provided through your harassment campaign. Chen's unauthorized documentation hadn't simply endangered one woman. It had created an immediate terrorist threat to the entire installation and every person stationed there. The cruel irony reached completion as the circle closed. In attempting to prevent what he perceived as dangerous negligence, he had committed the ultimate act of operational recklessness. Elena's response to the complete revelation was measured, her tears having dried but their tracks still visible on her weathered cheeks. She regarded Chen with something transcending forgiveness, understanding born from shared tragedy, that connected them across the artificial barriers of rank and regulation. "Your sister was an exemplary Marine," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of loss accumulated across years of combat and exile. Her maintenance reports helped us identify pattern changes in enemy logistics networks. She saved lives by being exactly who she was: thorough, professional, dedicated to excellence. Just like you. Chen collapsed into a nearby chair, the weight of interconnected tragedy crushing his carefully constructed worldview into fragments. They weren't adversaries in some ideological conflict, but parallel victims of the same war, bound together by losses that echoed across time like shrapnel through human flesh. The immediate threat demanded immediate response capabilities. Elena's expertise, concealed for so long beneath layers of manufactured identity, became the installation's primary defensive asset in identifying security vulnerabilities the enemy might attempt to exploit. She worked with focus that transformed her from outcast to prophet, every recommendation revealing depths of tactical knowledge that left experienced officers speechless with admiration. Chen, shattered by revelation but not destroyed by it, became her unlikely ally in defensive preparations. He utilized his obsessive documentation skills to help identify exactly how the enemy might use his leaked intelligence against them. The harasser and the hunted, working together to prevent a catastrophe that grief and misunderstanding had set into motion. But even as they prepared for the approaching storm, one question haunted the motor pool like exhaust fumes in confined spaces. Would their newfound understanding prove sufficient to stop enemies who had waited 6 years for this moment of revenge? The defensive preparations revealed Elena's true nature, like stripping camouflage from a concealed position. She could have fled, vanished into another manufactured identity, abandoned Camp Pendleton to face the threat she had inadvertently brought to their gates. Instead, she fortified every vulnerable point with the methodical precision of someone who understood that running only delayed the inevitable confrontation. Every vehicle received her personal inspection, every system examined, with the assumption that sabotage was not merely possible, but probable. She trained the motor pool personnel in detection techniques, learned in environments where a missed detail meant mass casualties, where vigilance represented the only barrier between order and chaos. Look for anomalies that shouldn't exist, she instructed a group of wide-eyed Marines gathered around a Humvee engine compartment. A wire that appears too new, a component that seems too clean, scratches on access panels that weren't there during the previous inspection. The enemy doesn't simply want to kill American personnel. They want to send a message that nowhere is safe, that no one is beyond their reach. Chen worked beside her with the dedication of someone seeking redemption through service. His grief had been transformed into protective fury directed outward, rather than at the woman he had wronged so profoundly. His documentation skills, previously wielded as weapons against her reputation, became tools of defense against those who threatened everything he had sworn to protect. "I need to understand something," he said during one of their late-night preparation sessions, his voice cracking under the weight of accumulated guilt. "How many Marines died because of my sister's reports? How many families received notification visits because I failed to protect her from being exploited?" Elena paused in her diagnostic work, her hands motionless on a computerized testing device. "Your sister saved more lives than she cost, Marcus. The intelligence we derived from her maintenance reports prevented dozens of attacks, identified supply routes, exposed enemy operational patterns. But war isn't a mathematical equation where you can balance lives lost against lives saved and achieve some kind of moral equilibrium. You can only attempt to make tomorrow safer than yesterday was." The revelation about Maria's death had accomplished more than destroying Chen's worldview. It had reconstructed his entire understanding of duty, responsibility, and the interconnected nature of military service. The same obsessive attention to detail that had made him a tormentor now made him a guardian, as he began identifying patterns in the installation's security that others had overlooked. Rodriguez coordinated the defensive response with the efficiency of someone who had managed similar threats in previous deployments. His protection of Elena evolved from personal instinct to strategic necessity, ensuring her expertise remained available without exposing her to unnecessary risks. Their shared history enabled communication beyond verbal exchange, a glance or gesture conveying tactical information that had been refined through combat experience. "The enemy's primary advantage has always been patience," Rodriguez explained during a comprehensive security briefing. "They've been planning this operation for 6 years, studying our procedures, identifying our vulnerabilities, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. But they don't know that we know they're coming. That represents our only tactical advantage." The intelligence reports painted a picture of professional precision rather than terrorist desperation. The enemy hadn't dispatched a squad of fanatics willing to die for their cause. They had sent specialists, former military personnel skilled in infiltration and sabotage, carrying equipment designed to maximize destruction while minimizing their exposure to defensive countermeasures. Elena studied the reconnaissance imagery with the intensity of someone reading her own death warrant. "They're not coming to create a massacre," she observed, her finger tracing movement patterns across the computer screen. "They're coming specifically for me. The installation is simply the stage for their final performance, the place where they intend to complete unfinished business from Afghanistan." The psychological warfare had already commenced through civilian communication channels. Anonymous messages arrived via email, text messaging, social media platforms, all carrying identical themes. "We know your location, we know your identity, we know what you did to our brothers." The enemy wanted her frightened, wanted her to make mistakes born from panic and desperation. Instead, Elena used the communications to construct a behavioral profile of her hunters. The timing of messages revealed their operational schedule and decision-making patterns. The linguistic analysis suggested their country of origin and level of education. The technical details of their approach indicated their training background and available resources. She was hunting her hunters, transforming their intimidation campaign into an intelligence-gathering operation that provided tactical advantages. "They're professionally competent," she admitted to Rodriguez during one of their private briefings. "But they're not invisible. They leave traces, patterns, operational signatures. The critical question is whether we can interpret them rapidly enough to stay ahead of their timeline." The installation's transformation was subtle, but comprehensive. Security patrols increased without appearing to increase dramatically. Maintenance schedules shifted to ensure maximum coverage during vulnerable time periods. Personnel rotations placed the most experienced defenders in critical positions while maintaining the appearance of normal operations. Chen's role in the defense surprised everyone, including himself. His civilian contractor status and obsessive personality made him the perfect early warning system for identifying anomalies that military personnel accustomed to structured environments might overlook completely. A delivery vehicle that arrived 10 minutes early, a maintenance uniform that appeared too pristine, credentials that satisfied security protocols but triggered his suspicious instincts. "You're developing into a capable defender," Rodriguez told him during one of their planning sessions. "Your sister would be proud of the man you're becoming." "My sister is dead because I couldn't see beyond my own grief and anger," Chen replied, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "I won't allow that to happen to anyone else under my watch." The waiting period was the most challenging aspect of their preparation. Elena moved through her daily routine with the hypervigilance of someone who understood that death was actively seeking her location. Every shadow could conceal an enemy. Every unexpected sound could signal the beginning of an assault. Every moment of apparent peace could be the final calm before violence erupted around them. But she had learned through years of survival that fear was a tool like any other piece of equipment. Used correctly, it sharpened reflexes and enhanced situational awareness. Used incorrectly, it paralyzed decision-making and destroyed effectiveness. She chose to use fear as fuel for her preparation, burning away everything non-essential until only purpose and determination remained. As the sun disappeared behind the California mountains, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold, Elena checked her tool roll one final time. Once, twice, 3 times. Always 3 adjustments. A ritual, born from necessity, and maintained through wisdom accumulated across multiple combat deployments. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation she had been avoiding for 6 years. The question was no longer whether the enemy would locate her position. The question was whether she would be prepared when they finally arrived to collect the debt they believed she owed them. The assault materialized at dawn with the precision of a surgical strike rather than the chaos of a terrorist attack. Elena identified them first through the systematic way they moved across the installation perimeter. Maintenance uniforms that fit too perfectly. Identification badges that passed electronic verification but failed the scrutiny of her combat-trained instincts. She had learned to think like her enemies, to recognize the predators' careful stalking through terrain designed to conceal their approach. "Motor pool security, this is Vasquez," she transmitted quietly through her radio headset, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had coordinated defensive operations under enemy fire. 6 individuals in maintenance gear approaching from multiple vectors. Southwest and northeast entry points. These are professionals with military training, not amateur terrorists. The response was swift, but deliberately measured. No dramatic alarms or rushing security teams, just a gradual tightening of the defensive perimeter around enemies who believed they remained undetected. Rodriguez had learned from Elena's tactical expertise that the most effective defense against professionals was to appear amateurish until the moment of decisive action. Chen, positioned at his newly assigned post as safety coordinator, provided the crucial secondary observation point. His obsessive attention to detail, previously weaponized against Elena, now served as an early warning system for the entire installation. He noticed the subtle wrongness in their body language, the way they carried themselves like soldiers pretending to be civilian contractors. "They're advancing toward the motor pool in coordinated teams," he reported through his communication device, his voice tight with controlled tension, but steady with newfound purpose. 2 separate approaches from different angles. They know exactly where they're going and what they're looking for. The enemy's operational plan was elegant in its lethal simplicity. Eliminate the installation's primary vehicles to prevent pursuit. Locate and kill the phantom sniper who had cost them strategic victories across multiple theaters, then disappear into the California desert before anyone could mount an effective response. They had studied Chen's leaked intelligence with professional thoroughness, identifying security weaknesses and operational vulnerabilities with the precision of master tacticians. What they hadn't anticipated was Chen's transformation from unwitting intelligence source to zealous protector. His intimate knowledge of the installation's systems, combined with his comprehensive understanding of the enemy's capabilities derived from his own surveillance reports, made him the perfect counter to their infiltration strategy. He had become the antibody to his own infection, the cure for the disease he had inadvertently introduced. Elena moved through the motor pool with the fluid efficiency of someone who had learned to navigate hostile environments where every shadow could conceal death. Her tool roll rode familiar against her hip, but now it contained more than instruments of mechanical repair. Concealed among the legitimate implements of her trade were tools of war, carefully hidden items that could serve multiple purposes when violence became inevitable. She had prepared for this confrontation for 6 years, even while hoping desperately that it would never materialize. The first direct encounter was almost anticlimactic in its brevity. One of the infiltrators, approaching what he assumed was an unguarded access point, found himself face-to-face with Elena as she emerged from beneath a camouflaged fighting position. For a suspended moment, they stared at each other across the narrow space between hunter and hunted, predator and prey, past sins and present reckoning. The recognition was mutual and immediate, two professionals acknowledging each other's capabilities before violence became unavoidable. Gunnery Sergeant Sarah Mitchell, the man said in heavily accented English, his hand moving slowly toward a concealed weapon while maintaining eye contact. The Phantom Sniper of Desert Falcon, you have been extremely difficult to locate across these many years. Apparently not difficult enough, Elena replied, her own hand resting casually on her modified tool roll. Chen's surveillance reports must have been extraordinarily detailed for you to track me here. The man's smile was cold and professionally appreciative. We have maintained patience for 6 years, waiting for this moment of justice. 6 years to balance the scales for our fallen brothers, for the operations you destroyed with your marksmanship, for the strategic objectives you cost us with your impossible accuracy. How many innocent civilians did those operations target? Elena asked, her voice carrying the moral authority earned through blood and sacrifice in defense of the defenseless. How many families were destroyed by your bombs, your ambushes, your campaigns of terror against non-combatants? The philosophical discussion terminated when the man's hand moved decisively toward his weapon. Elena's response was faster than conscious thought, muscle memory trained through years of life-or-death situations where hesitation measured in milliseconds meant the difference between survival and death. The improvised weapon from her tool roll found its target before the assassin could complete his draw, and the first threat was neutralized with surgical precision. The other infiltrators, hearing the brief commotion, abandoned stealth for speed. The motor pool erupted into controlled violence as installation security, guided by Chen's intelligence and Elena's tactical expertise, moved to contain the threat before it could spread beyond the immediate area. The enemy's careful planning crumbled against the reality of a defensive network that had been constructed specifically to counter their documented capabilities. But the leader of the infiltration team had reserved the most personal confrontation for himself. While his subordinates engaged installation security and diversionary actions, he made his way toward Elena's position with the patience of a master hunter who had waited years for this opportunity. This was not merely business or operational necessity, but personal revenge for losses that had consumed his life with the need for retribution. You destroyed everything I held sacred, he said, materializing from concealment with a precision rifle trained on Elena's center mass. My brother died in one of your sniper engagements, my nephew in another operation you compromised. You eliminated my family systematically, and now I eliminate you with the same thoroughness. Elena remained perfectly motionless, her hands visible but positioned for rapid action if the opportunity presented itself. Your family died because they chose to wage war against innocent people. I didn't make that choice for them, they made it themselves. I simply prevented them from making that same choice for others who couldn't defend themselves. The man's finger began applying pressure to the trigger mechanism. But before he could complete the lethal action, Chen appeared behind him like a vengeful spirit. The safety coordinator's documentation skills had extended to learning the precise location of every person within the motor pool, including infiltrators who believed they remained undetected. This is for my sister Maria, Chen said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of redemption earned through understanding and sacrifice. And for everyone else who died because I couldn't see past my own grief and anger. The confrontation concluded with the same brutal efficiency that had characterized the enemy's approach. Professional violence met by professional competence. Assassination attempt countered by protective intervention. The immediate threat was eliminated, but the psychological cost would be measured in more than casualties and collateral damage. Rodriguez arrived as the last infiltrator was secured by installation security, his face reflecting the strain of coordinating defensive operations against enemies who had been hunting his friend for 6 years. "Is it finished?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already understood the answer. Elena surveyed the motor pool, taking in the aftermath of violence that had finally found her despite 6 years of carefully maintained concealment. "It's never truly finished," she said quietly. "There will always be others, different enemies with different grievances. The question is whether we're prepared for them when they come." The immediate danger had passed, but the larger implications remained unavoidable. Elena's cover was irreparably compromised, her carefully constructed identity shattered beyond any possibility of repair. The choice now was whether to run again, assume another manufactured identity, or stand and fight on her own terms for the first time in 6 years. For the first time since Afghanistan, she chose to stand her ground and face the consequences. The aftermath of the failed infiltration sent shockwaves through military intelligence communities that reached from California to Washington and beyond. Elena's cover had been blown not merely locally but internationally, her face and real identity now known to every enemy network that had been hunting the Phantom Sniper for over half a decade. The comprehensive debriefing session in the installation commander's office felt like a military tribunal, with Elena serving as both defendant and primary witness. General Patricia Harrison, who had flown in from the Pentagon within hours of the incident, studied her with the intensity of someone attempting to solve a puzzle that had been troubling military intelligence for years. "Gunnery Sergeant Sarah Mitchell," she said, using her real name aloud for the first time in 6 years. "Officially killed in action during Operation Desert Falcon, unofficially the most successful scout sniper in Marine Corps history, and now apparently a civilian contractor maintaining vehicles in Southern California." Elena sat at attention in her chair, her hands folded calmly in her lap despite the magnitude of the situation she faced. "I've been maintaining more than vehicles, General. I've been maintaining lives, preventing mechanical failures, ensuring Marines return home safely to their families. The job classification changed, but the fundamental mission remained identical." Chen sat beside her, his presence both surprising and necessary, given his role in the intelligence leak that had exposed her location to enemy forces. His potential court-martial charges were serious enough to end his military career, but Elena's testimony would determine whether they were merely career-damaging or completely devastating to his future. "Staff Sergeant Chen," the general continued, her voice carrying the full weight of military justice. "Your unauthorized surveillance activities and transmission of classified information through compromised communication channels directly resulted in this security breach. Your actions endangered not only one individual, but this entire installation and everyone stationed here." Chen's voice remained steady despite the enormity of his situation and its potential consequences. "I accept complete responsibility for my actions, General. I allowed personal grief to compromise my professional judgment, and I nearly caused the deaths of innocent people because of my failure. But I also want to state for the official record that Gunnery Sergeant Mitchell is the finest vehicle maintenance specialist I have ever worked with. My harassment of her was personal vendetta, not professional assessment." The admission hung in the air like cordite smoke after a firefight, dangerous and potentially explosive in its implications. Rodriguez, who had remained silent throughout most of the proceedings, finally spoke in Elena's defense. "If I may, General." Chen's documentation skills proved instrumental in defending against the infiltration attempt. His attention to detail, previously used destructively, became a crucial defensive asset when properly directed. Without his intimate knowledge of his own intelligence leaks, we might not have anticipated their operational approach. General Harrison's expression remained professionally neutral. "Are you suggesting that causing a security breach somehow qualifies as defending against that same security breach?" "I'm suggesting that people can transform, that grief can be channeled into purpose, that former enemies can become allies, that critical mistakes can be converted into wisdom through understanding." Chen made a serious error in judgment, but he also helped prevent what could have been a massacre. The general's attention shifted back to Elena, with the focus of someone making decisions that would affect multiple lives and careers. "The question now is what to do with you, Gunnery Sergeant. Your expertise is clearly invaluable, but your operational security is completely compromised. Every enemy network that has been hunting you now knows exactly where you are and what identity you've been using. We can relocate you again, construct another cover identity, but there's no guarantee it will remain secure any longer than this one did. The cycle of running and hiding could continue indefinitely, but with diminishing returns and increasing risks. Elena had been dreading this moment for 6 years, but now that it had finally arrived, she felt only relief mixed with determination. I'm tired of running, General. Tired of concealing who I am and what I'm capable of contributing. Tired of watching preventable failures because I'm afraid to demonstrate my actual capabilities. Tired of hiding behind manufactured identities while Marines die from problems I could solve. You're requesting reinstatement to active duty, the General observed. I'm requesting the opportunity to serve openly, General. To utilize my specialized skills where they're most needed. To train other Marines in techniques that save lives and win battles. I've been Elena Vasquez for 6 years, and she's been a good person, a competent contractor, a valuable team member. But Sarah Mitchell was a Marine, and Marines don't abandon their posts when the fighting gets difficult. The silence that followed was heavy with possibility and consequence. General Harrison examined the files spread before her. Chen's documentation, Rodriguez's recommendations, intelligence assessments, and Elena's service record. The story they collectively told was complex, layered with mistakes and redemption, failure and success, loss and hope transformed into purpose. The Marine Corps has a significant problem, she said finally. Sniper technology and counter-sniper techniques have advanced considerably in the past 6 years. We've lost specialists to retirement, combat injuries, and enemy action. The expertise you developed in Afghanistan is needed now more than ever, but it cannot be properly utilized if you're dead or constantly relocating. Then provide me with the resources to remain alive while I do the work that needs to be done, Elena replied with quiet conviction. Full reinstatement, appropriate security measures. A team that understands the risks and accepts them willingly. I've been fighting this war alone for 6 years. Allow me to fight it with proper support and backup. Chen shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his voice barely above a whisper. I would like to be part of that team, General, if you'll have me despite my failures. I know I don't deserve the opportunity, but I understand Elena's capabilities better than anyone. I know the threats she faces and the value of what she contributes. I'd like the chance to protect what I nearly destroyed through my ignorance and grief. The General's decision would shape not only their individual futures but the future of Marine Corps sniper operations and counter-sniper defensive measures. Elena's techniques, developed through years of life-or-death field experience, represented institutional knowledge that couldn't be replicated through classroom instruction or simulation exercises. The choice was between preserving that knowledge in continued hiding or risking it in active service where it could save the most lives. Gunnery Sergeant Mitchell, General Harrison said, her voice carrying the authority of command and the weight of institutional responsibility. By the authority vested in me by the United States Marine Corps, I hereby reinstate you to active duty with the rank of Master Sergeant, effective immediately. You will establish and command a new sniper development program with full security clearance and comprehensive protection measures. The words struck Elena like physical impacts, each syllable carrying the weight of transformation from exile to service. 6 years of running, hiding, pretending to be less than her capabilities, ended in that single moment of official recognition. She was no longer Elena Vasquez, civilian contractor trying to remain invisible. She was Master Sergeant Sarah Mitchell, United States Marine Corps, and she had critical work to accomplish. Staff Sergeant Chen, the General continued, you will face disciplinary action for your security breach, but Gunnery Sergeant Mitchell's testimony will be considered heavily in determining your final sentence. You will also be transferred to the Sniper Development Program, where your obsessive attention to detail will be directed toward constructive rather than destructive purposes. Chen's relief was visible, but tempered by understanding that redemption was a process requiring sustained effort rather than a single moment of recognition. Thank you, General. I won't disappoint you again through my failures. Rodriguez smiled genuinely for the first time in days, his protective instincts finally validated by official recognition. If I may request, General, I'd like to transfer to the same program. Master Sergeant Mitchell and I have operational experience working together effectively under combat conditions. The general nodded approvingly. "Granted, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. You'll serve as the program's security liaison and operational coordinator. Your primary responsibility will be keeping Master Sergeant Mitchell alive long enough to accomplish her mission objectives." As they filed out of the commander's office, Elena felt the weight of her restored rank settling across her shoulders like a familiar piece of equipment she had missed more than she realized. The tool roll at her waist would soon be replaced by the insignia and equipment appropriate to her actual rank and capabilities, but the fundamental mission remained unchanged. Save lives, prevent disasters, transform hard-earned expertise into protection for those who needed it most. The war wasn't finished, might never be truly finished, but for the first time in 6 years, she wouldn't be fighting it alone or in the shadows. 8 months later, Master Sergeant Sarah Mitchell stood before a classroom filled with Marine Scout snipers and designated marksmen, her uniform bearing the insignia of rank she had never expected to wear again. The Advanced Marksmanship Development Center at Camp Pendleton had become the Marine Corps' premier training facility for long-range precision shooting, and Sarah had become its most valuable instructor and program developer. "The enemy's greatest advantage has always been unpredictability," she told the assembled students, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had learned every lesson through combat experience rather than theoretical study. "They don't follow our doctrine, our procedures, our expectations about how engagements should develop. They innovate, adapt, and evolve their tactics constantly. To defeat them consistently, we must think like them while maintaining our commitment to legitimate military objectives." Chen sat in the front row, his notebook filled with meticulous annotations and observations. His reduction in rank had been offset by his promotion to the program's intelligence and documentation specialist, a position that utilized his obsessive personality traits for beneficial rather than destructive purposes. The grief that had once driven him to harassment now drove him toward excellence, channeling his pain into protection for others. "Master Sergeant," one of the students raised her hand with a question. "How do you maintain emotional objectivity when you know enemy forces are specifically targeting you? How do you stay focused on mission objectives when the engagement becomes personal rather than purely tactical?" Sarah's smile was understanding but tinged with hard-earned wisdom. "You don't maintain complete objectivity, Lance Corporal. You use the personal investment to fuel your dedication while remembering that success isn't about personal revenge. It's about protecting the Marines who depend on your capabilities. The moment you make it about settling personal scores instead of accomplishing the mission, you become something other than a professional Marine." Rodriguez, now the program's security chief and operational coordinator, observed from the back of the classroom. The threats against Sarah hadn't diminished with her reinstatement to active duty. If anything, they had intensified as her new position became known throughout military and intelligence communities. But the security measures in place were comprehensive, and the team protecting her understood the value of what they were safeguarding. After the training session concluded, Sarah walked across the installation toward her quarters, the Pacific sunset painting the California sky in familiar shades of gold and crimson. Her transformation from hidden contractor to visible leader had been challenging in ways she hadn't anticipated, but it felt like returning home after a long and difficult exile. She was finally able to be who she had always been, a Marine in service to something greater than personal safety or comfort. "Master Sergeant," Chen called out, jogging to catch up with her across the parade ground, "I wanted to thank you again for your testimony during my disciplinary hearing. The review board was fair in their assessment, but I know your words carried significant weight in their decision." Sarah paused in her stride, studying the man who had once been her primary tormentor and was now among her most trusted colleagues. "You earned that fairness through your actions, Marcus. Every day since the attack, you've proven that people can change, that redemption is achievable through sustained effort. Your sister would be proud of the Marine you've become." They walked together in comfortable silence, two people bound by shared trauma and mutual forgiveness, working together to build something meaningful from the wreckage of their past conflicts. The program they were developing would save lives, prevent casualties, transform the painful lessons of Afghanistan into protection for future Marines. It was a legacy worthy of those they had lost and those they continued to serve. Rodriguez appeared beside them, his expression carrying the serious demeanor that indicated developing situations requiring their attention. "We have a developing situation," he announced quietly. Intelligence intercepts suggest another team is being assembled by a different organization. Same target, different operational approach. They're learning from the failures of the previous attempt. Sarah nodded calmly, her response reflecting the confidence that came from no longer fighting alone. How much time do we have for preparation? Current assessment suggests several weeks, possibly longer depending on their infiltration capabilities and operational timeline. But this time, we're prepared in ways we weren't before. The defensive measures are established and tested. The team is trained and coordinated. We have early warning systems and intelligence networks that didn't exist during the previous threat. The news should have been frightening, should have triggered the same flight response that had governed her actions for 6 years. Instead, Sarah felt only determined resolve. She had spent too long running from this fight, but now she possessed the resources, support, and official backing to face it directly. The Phantom Sniper was no longer a phantom, no longer operating in isolation and secrecy. She was a Master Sergeant in the United States Marine Corps, surrounded by Marines who understood her value and were committed to protecting both her and the larger mission she represented. "Then we'd better continue our preparations and training," she said, adjusting her equipment belt with practiced precision. Once, twice, 3 times, always 3 adjustments, a ritual that had preserved her life through dangers she couldn't have imagined when she first developed the habit. The installation continued its daily operations around them, Marines and support personnel conducting their duties with the quiet competence that maintained America's military readiness. But now at its operational center was a program dedicated to staying ahead of enemies who would never cease trying to eliminate American snipers and the strategic advantages they provided. Sarah Mitchell had finally discovered her proper place in the world, not hidden in shadows and fear, but standing in the light of official recognition, teaching others to see threats before they could materialize into casualties. The work remained dangerous, the enemies patient and professional, but she was no longer alone in facing them. And that transformation made all the difference between survival and victory, between hiding and serving, between existing and truly living as the Marine she had always been meant to be. 3 years after her reinstatement, Master Sergeant Sarah Mitchell stood on the observation deck of the Advanced Marksmanship Range, watching her latest class of sniper candidates engage targets at extreme distances. The Barrett M82A1 rifles thundered across the desert landscape as Marines attempted shots that would have been considered impossible just a decade earlier. Each round fired represented not just marksmanship training, but the evolution of a program that had saved countless lives across multiple theaters of operation. The radio crackled with target confirmations and range adjustments, the controlled chaos of precision training that had become the new standard for Marine Corps sniper development. Sarah's program had grown from a small experimental unit to the premier long-range marksmanship facility in the military, training not just Marines but soldiers, sailors, and airmen from across all service branches. Staff Sergeant Chen approached with his ever-present tablet, now filled with performance metrics and training assessments rather than surveillance reports. His transformation from bitter antagonist to dedicated instructor remained one of the program's most remarkable success stories, proving that redemption was possible, even from the darkest places of grief and hatred. "Master Sergeant, we have confirmation that yesterday's techniques prevented another IED attack in Syria. Intelligence reports indicate our counter-sniper protocols helped identify and eliminate 3 enemy marksmen before they could engage our convoy routes." Sarah looked up from her rangefinder, a slight smile crossing her weathered features. The reports never mentioned names, but she knew which Marines had applied the training she developed. Former students now serving in combat zones, using lessons learned on California ranges to save American lives thousands of miles away. It was the kind of abstract satisfaction that made all the dangerous exposure worthwhile. "How many confirmed saves this month?" she asked, though she suspected Chen already had the exact numbers memorized with his characteristic attention to detail. 47 documented incidents where our training directly prevented casualties, with an additional 23 probable saves where our techniques contributed to successful mission outcomes. The statistics should have felt overwhelming, but Sarah had learned to process them as validation rather than pressure. Each number represented families who wouldn't receive devastating news, children who would see their parents return home, spouses who wouldn't become widows or widowers because her program had made the difference between life and death. Rodriguez appeared at her elbow with coffee, and the satisfied expression of someone whose protective instincts had been validated by measurable results. "The Pentagon wants to expand the program again," he announced. 5 additional installations, full funding, priority resource allocation. They're calling it the Mitchell Doctrine. The recognition was gratifying, but Sarah's response remained measured by hard-earned wisdom about institutional politics and the dangers of rapid expansion. "That's an honor, Gunny, but I maintain concerns about scaling too rapidly. The techniques we're teaching require experienced instructors, Marines who understand not just the procedures but the psychology and decision-making processes behind them. Which is why they're promoting you to First Sergeant and giving you complete authority over the expansion timeline and personnel selection," Rodriguez replied with obvious pride. "You'll have the resources to train those instructors properly, to maintain quality standards while expanding the reach and impact." The promotion was unexpected but not unwelcome. Sarah had learned to accept recognition when it served the larger mission rather than personal advancement. She would use the additional authority to ensure the program maintained its effectiveness while growing to meet increasing demands from combat commanders worldwide. "I want my core team to remain intact," she said, gesturing toward Chen and Rodriguez. "The people who built this program understand the work in ways that can't be replicated through textbooks or standard military education." "Already approved and implemented," Rodriguez assured her. First Sergeant Rodriguez, Master Sergeant Chen, and the entire original team are part of the expansion package. The group that created this capability will be the group that spreads it throughout the military. Later that evening, Sarah stood on the firing line where it had all begun, the same range where she had first demonstrated the techniques that would revolutionize Marine Corps marksmanship training. The Barrett rifle rested on its bipod before her, the massive weapon that had become synonymous with her program and her legend. In the distance, targets waited at ranges that tested the absolute limits of both equipment and human capability. Chen and Rodriguez joined her, the 3 of them connected by bonds forged through crisis and strengthened through shared dedication to something greater than personal achievement. They had traveled from antagonism through understanding to genuine partnership, proving that even the most bitter conflicts could be transformed into productive collaboration when people chose growth over grievance. "First Sergeant Mitchell," Chen said, using her new rank with obvious satisfaction. "It has an appropriate sound to it, doesn't it?" "The rank is less important than the mission it enables," Sarah replied, though her expression suggested she wasn't entirely immune to the professional recognition. "What matters is the lives we save, the families who remain intact, the Marines who come home, because we did our jobs with excellence and dedication." Rodriguez nodded toward the memorial wall visible through the range facility window, where names were engraved of Marines whose lives had been saved through program training. Jackson, Torres, Washington, and dozens of others who might have died if not for techniques developed through their shared experience and dedication. "Their sacrifices weren't meaningless," he observed quietly. "They became the foundation for something that saved hundreds of other lives, prevented countless tragedies, turned personal loss into public service." The desert wind carried the sound of evening aircraft operations and the promise of tomorrow's challenges and opportunities. Sarah adjusted her equipment belt, still worn despite her elevated rank and administrative responsibilities, still adjusted 3 times in ritual observance of lessons learned through blood and loss, through trial and error, through the gradual accumulation of wisdom that could only be earned through service and sacrifice. The tools had evolved, and the responsibilities had expanded, but the fundamental mission remained unchanged: save lives, prevent disasters, serve something greater than personal comfort or safety. As they walked back toward the facility buildings, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her from hiding to leadership, from shame to pride, from isolation to community and purpose. The enemies would continue to evolve and adapt. They always did. The threats would multiply and become more sophisticated. The challenges would test every limit of capability and endurance. The dangers would persist and find new forms of expression. But she wouldn't face them alone anymore, wouldn't fight in shadows and secrecy. She had a team, a mission, and a purpose that transformed every day of service into a victory against those who chose destruction over protection, death over life, chaos over order and civilization. The Phantom Sniper had found her way home, not to a geographical location, but to a sense of purpose and belonging, not to safety and comfort, but to service and meaning, not to the shadows where she had hidden for so long, but to the light where she belonged as a leader and teacher and protector. In the distance, another aircraft lifted off into the star-filled California sky, carrying with it the hopes and dreams of everyone who served, everyone who sacrificed personal desires for public duty, everyone who chose to stand between the innocent and those who would harm them. First Sergeant Sarah Mitchell watched it climb toward the heavens and smiled with quiet satisfaction. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, fresh opportunities to serve and protect, additional chances to prove that expertise combined with dedication could overcome any enemy, defeat any threat, save any life worth saving. The work continued without end. The mission endured through changing circumstances. And, somewhere in the darkness beyond American borders, other enemies were learning that the phantom sniper was no longer a phantom, no longer operating in isolation and secrecy. She was a leader, a teacher, a protector whose influence extended far beyond the reach of their hatred and desire for revenge. It was sufficient for any lifetime. It was more than sufficient. It was everything she had ever wanted her service and sacrifice to accomplish and represent. 6 months later, the call came through encrypted channels at 0347 hours, jolting Sarah from the light sleep that had become her norm since accepting the expanded responsibilities of program leadership. The voice on the secure line belonged to Colonel Harrison, now serving as Pentagon liaison for Special Operations Marksmanship Programs. First Sergeant Mitchell, we have an urgent situation developing in the Pacific Theater. Hostage rescue operation, extremely high-value targets, unprecedented range requirements. Your expertise is specifically requested by name. Sarah was fully alert within seconds, her mind already processing tactical considerations and logistical requirements. What's the operational timeline, Colonel? 12 hours maximum before the window closes permanently. Transport is already en route to your location. Full equipment package, your choice of support personnel, complete operational authority within mission parameters. The details that followed painted a picture of complexity that would have been impossible to address just a few years earlier. American diplomats held in a fortified compound, enemy snipers positioned at ranges exceeding normal engagement distances, terrain and weather conditions that pushed every limit of equipment and human capability. It was exactly the kind of mission that had led to the development of her program, the scenario that justified every hour of training and every innovation they had implemented. "I'll need Chen and Rodriguez," she said without hesitation. "Their skills are essential for this type of operation, and we've worked together long enough to function as an integrated unit." "Already approved and briefed," the colonel replied. "They're preparing equipment loads as we speak. Transport arrives in 30 minutes. The flight to the operational staging area gave Sarah time to review intelligence assessments and mission parameters with her team. The hostage location was positioned on a mountainous island where conventional rescue approaches would result in certain casualties among both hostages and rescue personnel. Enemy defensive positions commanded all normal approach routes, and their sniper teams were equipped with state-of-the-art equipment and extensive training. But there was a single geographical feature that might provide the angle needed for successful intervention: a ridgeline positioned 3 miles from the target compound. The distance was at the absolute limit of effective sniper engagement, requiring perfect conditions and flawless execution. Even with the most advanced equipment available, success would depend on factors beyond normal tactical planning. Chen studied the topographical maps with his characteristic obsessive attention to detail, calculating wind patterns, atmospheric conditions, and ballistic trajectories with mathematical precision. "The environmental factors are going to be challenging," he observed. "Crosswinds, temperature variations, humidity fluctuations. All the variables we train for, but at ranges where small errors become large misses." Rodriguez reviewed the intelligence reports on enemy capabilities and positioning. "Their counter-sniper teams are professionals, probably Russian or Chinese trained. They'll be watching for exactly this type of approach, ready to engage any attempt at long-range intervention. We'll have 1 shot, maybe 2, before they locate our position and respond with overwhelming force." Sarah nodded, understanding the implications completely. She had built her reputation on impossible shots under extreme conditions, but this would test every limit of capability and experience she had accumulated over years of combat and training. The Barrett rifle had been modified specifically for ultra-long-range engagements, equipped with the most advanced optics and ballistic computers available to military forces. But ultimately, success would depend on the same factors that had always determined sniper effectiveness: patience, precision, and the ability to remain calm under pressure when lives hung in the balance. The infiltration to the ridge position took 14 hours of careful movement through terrain designed by nature to prevent exactly this kind of approach. Sarah and her team moved like ghosts through the mountainous landscape, avoiding enemy patrols and surveillance systems while carrying the specialized equipment needed for the extreme range engagement. Every piece of gear had been selected for maximum effectiveness while minimizing weight and signature. The Barrett rifle broke down into components that could be carried by different team members, then reassembled at the firing position. Ballistic computers, range-finding equipment, environmental sensors, and communication systems were distributed across the team to ensure redundancy and mission continuation, even if personnel were lost. The final approach to the ridge required 4 hours of inch-by-inch movement, each step carefully planned to avoid detection by enemy forces, who were undoubtedly watching for exactly this type of infiltration. Sarah had learned patience in environments where hasty movement meant death, where the ability to remain motionless for hours was as important as marksmanship skills. The firing position offered an unobstructed view of the target compound, but the range measurement confirmed their worst fears: 5,247 meters, nearly 3¼ miles, at the absolute limit of both equipment capability and human skill. Atmospheric conditions were marginal, with variable crosswinds and temperature gradients that would affect bullet trajectory in ways that required real-time calculation and adjustment. Chen established the environmental monitoring station, his instruments providing continuous data on wind speed and direction, temperature, humidity, and barometric pressure. Every few minutes, he updated calculations that would determine holdover, windage correction, and timing for the critical shot. Rodriguez coordinated communications with the rescue team and maintained surveillance of enemy positions that might threaten their location. His counter-sniper training allowed him to identify potential threats before they could develop into immediate dangers, providing early warning that might mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Sarah settled behind the Barrett rifle, her body assuming the shooting position that had become as natural as breathing through years of training and combat experience. The massive weapon required different techniques from standard sniper rifles, its recoil and muzzle blast demanding careful management to maintain accuracy and concealment. Through the powerful scope, she could see the compound where American diplomats were being held, the enemy positions that controlled all approaches, the sniper teams that would immediately respond to any rescue attempt. The target was clear but impossibly distant, a shot that would require perfect execution of every skill she had developed over her entire career. The Barrett rifle had been her companion through countless engagements, its reliability and power extending her reach far beyond normal human limitations. But even this formidable weapon was operating at maximum capability for the range and conditions they faced. Hours passed as they waited for optimal conditions and the signal that would initiate the rescue operation. Sarah controlled her breathing, her heart rate, her entire physiology, to achieve the state of calm focus required for extreme precision shooting. Every muscle, every nerve, every thought was directed toward the single moment when she would have one opportunity to save American lives. The radio crackled with the rescue team's final approach confirmation. They were in position, ready to move. The instant enemy sniper positions were neutralized. The success of the entire operation, the lives of hostages and rescue personnel, depended on shots that would test every limit of capability and equipment. Chen's voice was barely a whisper as he provided final environmental data. Wind steady at 7 knots from the northeast, temperature holding at 42 degrees, humidity dropping slowly. Optimal conditions for the next 90 seconds, then deteriorating as weather patterns shift. Rodriguez confirmed enemy positions and movements. Target acquired, no change in defensive posture. Counter-sniper teams in established positions unaware of our location. Window is open for engagement. Sarah settled deeper into her shooting position, her breathing slowing to the rhythm that had carried her through impossible shots in Afghanistan and Syria, and a dozen other battlefields where American lives depended on her precision. The Barrett rifle was an extension of her will, its weight and balance as familiar as her own heartbeat. The target in her scope represented not just an enemy position, but the barrier between American hostages and freedom, between families and reunion, between life and death. The trigger press was smooth and deliberate, the culmination of thousands of hours of training and years of combat experience compressed into a single moment of perfect execution. The massive rifle roared, its muzzle blast and recoil testament to the power needed to deliver precision at such extreme ranges. Through the scope, Sarah watched the bullet's flight path, its trajectory arcing across 3 miles of mountainous terrain, fighting wind and gravity and atmospheric interference to reach its target with surgical precision. The enemy sniper position erupted in debris and silence, the threat eliminated with a single shot that would become legend among those who witnessed it. But there was no time for celebration or admiration. Rodriguez was already calling out the second target, another enemy position that threatened the rescue operation. Sarah cycled the bolt, chambered another round, and acquired the second target through her scope. The Barrett rifle spoke again, its thunder echoing across the mountains as another impossible shot found its mark at ranges that defied conventional wisdom about sniper capabilities. The enemy defensive network collapsed, as key positions were eliminated by precision fire that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. The rescue team moved with swift efficiency, their approach covered by Sarah's overwatch and the elimination of threats that would have made their mission impossible. Within minutes, the hostages were secured and moving toward extraction points, their freedom purchased by shots that would be studied and analyzed for years to come. The extraction from the ridge position was as carefully planned as the infiltration, but with the added urgency of enemy forces now actively searching for the sniper team that had devastated their defensive positions. Sarah and her team moved through the mountainous terrain like shadows, avoiding pursuit while carrying equipment that had made the impossible shots possible. The successful completion of the mission represented more than just tactical victory. It validated years of program development, proved the effectiveness of techniques that had been dismissed as theoretical by conventional military wisdom, and demonstrated that properly trained and equipped sniper teams could achieve results that transcended normal operational limitations. The debriefing back at Camp Pendleton was attended by senior officers from across all service branches, intelligence officials, and civilian leaders who understood the strategic implications of what had been accomplished. The 3-mile shots were already being analyzed by ballisticians and weapons specialists who wanted to understand how the impossible had been made routine. But for Sarah, the satisfaction was simpler and more personal. American diplomats were returning to their families. Enemy positions that had threatened other operations were eliminated, and the techniques developed through her program had proven their worth under the most challenging conditions imaginable. First Sergeant Mitchell, Colonel Harrison said during the formal debriefing, "Your shots have been confirmed by multiple independent sources. 3.2 miles, extreme environmental conditions, perfect accuracy on multiple targets. It's the longest confirmed sniper kill in military history, and it saved American lives." "The records are less important than the results," Sarah replied with characteristic humility. "What matters is that Americans came home safely, that enemy threats were neutralized, that the mission succeeded. The rest is just statistics for military historians to debate." Chen and Rodriguez exchanged glances, their pride in their teammate and leader evident despite military protocol that discouraged emotional displays. They had witnessed something that transcended normal human capability, the culmination of training and dedication that had transformed individual skill into strategic advantage. The program they had built together, forged through conflict and refined through shared purpose, had achieved its ultimate validation through combat success under impossible conditions. The announcement of Sarah's promotion to Sergeant Major came with assignment to the Pentagon as Senior Advisor for Long-Range Marksmanship Development across all military services. It was recognition of expertise that had grown beyond Marine Corps boundaries to become a strategic asset for American military capabilities worldwide. But perhaps more importantly, it was acknowledgement that the Phantom Sniper had become something greater than her legend. She had become a teacher, a leader, a builder of programs that would save lives long after she retired from active service. The ceremony at Camp Pendleton drew attendees from across the military and intelligence communities, recognizing not just individual achievement, but the transformation of sniper capabilities that had changed the nature of modern warfare. Sarah stood at attention as the sergeant major chevrons were pinned to her uniform, the culmination of a journey that had taken her from hiding in shadows to standing in the bright light of official recognition and respect. Chen and Rodriguez flanked her during the ceremony, their own promotions and recognition testament to the power of shared purpose and mutual support. From bitter enemies to trusted allies, from conflict to collaboration, from individual grievance to collective mission, they had proven that redemption was possible even from the darkest places of loss and hatred. The reception that followed was attended by Marines whose lives had been saved by program training, families of service members who had benefited from techniques developed through shared expertise, and leaders who understood the strategic value of capabilities that had seemed impossible just years earlier. But the most meaningful moment came when a young Marine approached Sarah with obvious nervousness and deep respect. "Sergeant Major, I wanted to thank you personally. Your training saved my life in Syria last month. I made a shot I never thought possible because of what you taught me." Sarah studied the young Marine's face, seeing in it the reflection of every service member who had benefited from programs built through dedication and sacrifice. "What's your name, Marine?" "Lance Corporal Martinez, Sergeant Major, 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines." "Well, Lance Corporal Martinez, you saved your own life through training and dedication. I just provided some techniques. You provided the courage and skill to apply them when it mattered most." The interaction was repeated dozens of times throughout the evening, each conversation confirming that the program's impact extended far beyond statistics and official reports. Individual Marines, soldiers, sailors, and airmen had survived combat situations because of training that began with one woman's refusal to accept that impossible shots couldn't be made routine through proper preparation and technique. As the evening concluded, Sarah stood once again on the observation deck overlooking the range where it had all begun. The Barrett rifles were secured for the night, but tomorrow would bring new students, fresh challenges, continued opportunities to transform individual expertise into collective capability. Chen and Rodriguez joined her for the final time as a team assigned to Camp Pendleton. Tomorrow would bring new assignments, different responsibilities, the natural evolution of careers built through shared service and mutual support. But the bonds forged through crisis and strengthened through success would endure beyond geographical separation or administrative changes. "Sergeant Major Mitchell," Chen said with obvious emotion despite his attempts at military bearing. "It's been an honor serving with you, learning from you, being part of something that made a real difference. The honor has been mine, Marcus. You proved that people can change, that enemies can become allies, that dedication can overcome any obstacle. Your sister would be proud of the Marine you became." Rodriguez nodded toward the memorial wall that now bore dozens of names, Marines whose lives had been saved through program training and innovation. "We built something worth building," he observed. "Something that will continue long after we've moved on to other assignments and responsibilities." Sarah adjusted her equipment belt one final time, the 3 adjustments that had become ritual through years of service and survival. The tools would change, the locations would shift, the specific challenges would evolve, but the fundamental mission would remain constant. Serve something greater than personal comfort. Protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Transform individual expertise into collective strength. Save lives through skill and dedication, and the willingness to face impossible challenges with determination and hope. The Phantom Sniper had found her true home, not in any geographical location but in the purpose that gave meaning to service and sacrifice. Tomorrow would bring the Pentagon. New responsibilities, broader influence, the opportunity to shape military capabilities on a strategic scale. But tonight, she was simply a Marine who had served with honor, built something meaningful from the wreckage of conflict, and proven that redemption was possible for anyone willing to choose growth over grievance, service over self-interest, hope over despair. The work would continue, the mission would endure, and somewhere in the darkness beyond American borders, enemies would learn that the legend had become something even more dangerous than they had feared. A teacher whose influence multiplied through every Marine trained, every technique perfected, every life saved through expertise shared rather than hoarded. It was more than sufficient for any lifetime of service. It was everything she had ever wanted her sacrifice to accomplish. The story of Elena Vasquez had ended years ago. The legacy of Sergeant Major Sarah Mitchell was just beginning, carried forward by every Marine who would apply her techniques, every family who would remain intact because of her dedication, every impossible shot that would be made possible through training and determination, and the refusal to accept defeat. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.